Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom and think. I'm Andrew Davidson, SVP and Chief Insights Officer for Mintel Compare Media, based in New York. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing an emerging global trend in credit that some have suggested that due to the COVID-19 crisis, is the right product at the right time, and that is buy now, pay later, otherwise known as BNPL. So joining me to assess this trend, I've got two of our experts in this space, Dr. Mark Miller in Chicago and Tom Slide in London. Welcome to the pod.
Hi.
Good morning. Hello.
So before we get started and before we dig into this, let's do some quick introductions. If you could just briefly say, your role and your background, how long you've been at Mintel.
Great. So I'm Mark Miller, Associate Director of Insights for Financial Services. I've been with Mintel for about 2 years, focused mostly on credit cards, lending, and general payments landscape in both the U.S. and Canada. And along with Andrew, I'm representing the Comper Media brand at Mintel, which delivers omni-channel marketing data and insights across banking products and actually beyond banking to a few other industries as well.
Hi, I'm Tom Slide. I'm from the London office. I've been with Mintel for just over 5 years. I'm a senior financial services analyst working on the reports team. I've written across both retail and finance, but at the moment I write mostly about finance and payments. Recently I've written reports on topics such as retail payment options, and I'm currently just finishing a report on consumer attitudes towards debt. So right up to date on this.
Interesting. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. All right. So, Australian company Afterpay, which is one of the pioneers in the buy now, pay later space, just recently put out a press release, actually mid-May, announced that they'd reached a milestone of some 5 million customers in the US, plus about, they already have about 3 million in Australia, nearly a million in the UK, where it's known as ClearPay. Chinese giant Tencent has invested in Afterpay. Stock price is through the roof during COVID. And in general, BNPL has been described as a craze, a trend gripping millennials. I mean, we're basically seeing it emerge all over the world. What's going on?
It's absolutely, it's becoming a huge trend. Here in the UK, we've got, I think Klarna is by far the biggest. We do have Afterpay, which over here is called ClearPay, but only launched in June of last year. We also have a company called Lay-By, which I think is from New Zealand, which launched earlier in 2019. A few other smaller players. We've got people like Pay Later and Zip, but they all remain fairly small and really under the heel of Klarna here, which is becoming far more popular. I think what's interesting, like you mentioned, is how it's become almost cult-like amongst millennials and younger people, and that's largely based to the targeting. Their advertising is very heavily targeted at the sort of under 35 age ranges, and we've seen lots of partnerships with sort of big hitting TV shows, things like Love Island and Killing Eve here, which has really helped drive their awareness and help drive people onto online retailers in particular. I think I just wanted to pull out one stat from our research, from some of our fashion research recently, which showed that it's a fifth, so 19% of under 25s actually say that finance options is one of the key drivers in choosing where to shop, which I think just shows how important that is, especially with some of the younger retailers here like Boohoo, ASOS, and the like, who really is becoming really important to their business model.
Yeah, and in the U.S., it's a pretty rapidly growing space as well. There's a lot of third-party kind of standalone options, as well as a lot of the established financial brands that are getting into the space. What I probably call the big three in the U.S. right now are Affirm, which was founded by Max Levchin, who happened to also be a co-founder of a little company called PayPal, and then Afterpay, which Tom mentioned, as well as Klarna, both also having pretty large presence in the US. But outside of those three, the list really continues. So there's Bread, Sezzle, Uplift, QuadPay, which is powered by the Stripe network, and Splitit, which also recently announced partnerships with both Visa and MasterCard. So some big names out there, a lot of players. Most of these do work on that partner relationship model where financing is available with participating retailers, but there are companies like Affirm, Klarna, and QuadPay that are also issuing virtual Visa cards cards within the app. So you can even put some of those in your mobile wallet and then make purchases in store anywhere that Visa's accepted. So that's a pretty significant development that even moves it outside of just online shopping. A firm about, I think early last year, announced a partnership with Walmart, which, of course is a huge brand partnership when you're thinking about retail and payments. So bringing it into the physical store. So, that's kind of the third party options, but, I mentioned the traditional financial brands as well. So we're seeing another big piece in the US and in Canada as well now, with credit card companies offering installment financing options on the card. So American Express kind of pioneered this a few years ago with the Planet features, which lets you take existing purchases and convert them into fixed installment plans. And then over the last year or two, Chase and Citi rolled out similar plans in the US. CIBC rolled out a plan in Canada. The Amazon Prime Rewards card also offers equal interest-free payments on purchases. So Affirm is partnering with Walmart, but then Amazon also has an option in-house with their credit card.
Well, like deep breath. I mean, it's like, it's a hot space. I mean, there's so many names that you're both sort of throwing out there. Some have been around a while, some are newer, sort of more fintech startups. I guess a critic or a cynic looking on might say, well, okay, this is, obviously there's a lot of buzz around this, but it's not really new. I mean, we've had similar types of, financing in the past. It's not really innovative. I mean, you think about a credit card, the basic premise is that you're buying and you're paying later. So what do you think?
I think that's very true. I think it's clearly buy now, pay later isn't in itself a new idea. I think it's been around in retail for many years. But I think that there is a difference in these new schemes from the old kind of traditional buy now, pay later and this new kind of style. I think what makes it different is the way the products are marketed, and the sort of underlying business model is slightly different, I think, here. Traditional buy now, pay later was all about enabling customers to sort of spread the cost. It was about overcoming a barrier of affordability. So it'd be for buying big purchases. It was very big in furniture retailers and electrical goods and expensive items that you kind of have to spread the cost of. So it's instead of saving up for them. I think the new buy now, pay later products are different. In fact, they're targeted to a large degree, though not entirely, towards lower value purchases. We've seen them become really popular in partnership with fashion retailers, for example, where the sort of basket size is much smaller but much more frequent. And that wasn't how traditionally buy now, pay later was used. And also, it's kind of turned on its head. Traditionally, buy now, pay later would either charge interest to the customer, or there'd be an interest-free period, in which case they would largely earn their money from kind of fees and late fees, or from just increasing the upfront price of the product to start with if you're a retailer. And so building it into that first price. The new products are different in the fact that with the retailer partnerships, it's the retailer effectively pays commission to Klarna or Clearpay, whoever it is. And then, so effectively the retailer's paying that, and then the customer gets it interest free. And often they pitch themselves as having no late fees and no kind of comeback on your credit rating and things like that, which has confused a lot of people about how they work, because they are so different from the old models. And that gives them quite a strong kind of marketing message to consumers about obviously being interest free and being effectively much more risk free than traditionally credit was compared to the old ones.
I was going to say a lot of what I'm seeing in some of the messaging is around the experience. Like you say, it's about the speed, the experience. And I know you said that you've tried Klarna. How was that? I've
tried Klarna, partly just on a professional basis. I like to test these things out, so I tried all sorts of things. But I tried Klarna because it's quite different from a lot of other ways of working. And so you have to really understand things like Klarna, you have to kind of use them and use the app, because they're not just about credit. This isn't just a new way of borrowing money. Klarna was originally a sort of B2B payments provider, and it's built out from that to then start having a kind of to consumer angle to it. But the app is effectively designed as a portal to shopping. It's designed entirely around how e-commerce works, how shopping is now done. It's been built in the kind of e-commerce age. Yeah. It's designed ready for social shopping and things like that. And so the app pulls together, it's not just a way of getting credit, it's a way of looking for offers, looking for deals, browsing. You can manage your orders, manage your returns, manage all sorts of different offers all in one place. And so it's interesting because I know a few weeks ago you did a recording about frictionless retail on a podcast, I think. And I think really Klarna's and these products are designed to fit into that. A lot of what was discussed in that podcast about how retail is becoming much more frictionless, and there's all these different kind of different ways of checkout, and these kind of digital credit products sit in that kind of ecosystem much better in a way that credit cards kind of struggle to fit into, I think.
I mean, and I think that having that ability to offer discounts via the app, I mean, that to me it seems extremely powerful and for consumers.
Another thing I'd point out, just from the difference, like Tom and Andrew, we both said, it's not really new. I've always kind of viewed buy now pay later as kind of a reverse layaway option. So in your traditional layaway models, you'd make payments over time, and then once you made all the payments, then you receive the item. But this is a version where you kind of meet the need for the more kind of modern millennial, probably Gen Z need for instant gratification. So you get your goods right away, and then you pay it over time as it's most convenient. So that's a big kind of differentiator of what we've seen in the past from these sort of financing models. Of course, as Tom said, you're also seeing much smaller types of purchases. You're seeing shorter term with no fees, and then of course there is that kind of social element to it, which I think is a big differentiating point. It kind of look at the marketing for Klarna, for example, and just how everyone's engaging with the app. It's a completely different experience than what you're used to.
Very different. So winners and losers. Who do you think? Who are the winners and losers from this trend?
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at this as a new way to pay, and therefore it has to be a competitor to the old ways to pay. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, we do see. I'll throw some other Mintel consumer data out here. So we have a survey that shows between 35 to 40% of 18 to 44-year-olds would prefer to use a buy now pay later option over a credit card when shopping online. So when you look at that, you're thinking, oh geez, if I'm issuing credit cards, what does that mean for me? But buy now pay later, I think, can also be complementary to credit and debit card. So even if your initial transaction is through a buy now pay later option, the customer is still making those payments from their bank account or from their credit card. Of course, if the customer uses the buy now pay later option and then decides they don't ever need a credit card, that's a big threat to the industry. But if they end up using that card to pay the installments, then it's the complementary relationship. And of course, the credit card issuers now are, as I mentioned earlier, creating their own type of installment plans on existing purchases, which can kind of help customers remain within that ecosystem. And so in that sense, the disruption is forcing credit card issuers to adapt, and with potentially moving a little bit further away from revolving balances and variable APRs, which overall I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you hit on a couple of great points there, and I was thinking, we're going to talk in a minute about the impact on the consumer. So I think about this, about winners. I mean, I think about innovation as being the winner. Like to your point, Mark, the response from the industry has been to develop and create other new types of financing products. I think innovation is the broader winner, and we'll talk about the consumer in a minute. But you're right. I think when I've spoken about this topic, this trend to our sort of US credit card clients, they certainly see this as a threat. They certainly see it as a threat, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a threat, to your point. And I think, when we go back and you think about how this started to unfold in the US, and of course, initially it was in the retail space, and now they're starting to attack, the travel space. So, those partnerships with Affirm and Delta, or Goldman and JetBlue, or Canada and in Canada, you got Uplift and Porter, a couple of those partnerships you mentioned. So nibbling away at the same sort of piece of the pie, as it were. But it is at the moment still sort of on the edges in terms of impacting, I think, traditional credit card issuers' business. I did see one new marketing campaign out of Australia, which sort of made me sort of sit up and take note, and that was Afterpay partnering with Qantas Airways out of Australia and offering an incentive of points for when you make your first purchase with Afterpay. We haven't yet seen that in the US, so it'd be interesting if they do start to build in miles and points and rewards. That really sort of takes it up to a new level.
Yeah, I think that could be a bit of a game changer if we start to see the really strong rewards associated with some of these standalone products. Then you take another step into that competitive mix.
Yeah, but I think I agree with your point, is that it doesn't have to be a direct threat, and I think that's all about this sort of adopting this sort of ecosystem mindset, looking for new ways to partner with companies, collaborate with companies, build new products that, like you mentioned, Mark. It's a different way of thinking. What about you, Tom? Winners and losers?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting points there. And I just before I move on to my points, I think that there's some interesting ideas there around the competition space. And I think you're right. I think there's a lot of scope here for them to sit side by side in a quite kind of complementary way. I would say, though, that the risk is, like you say, is getting, so the biggest kind of friction point of any of these payment schemes is signing up originally. It's the same, when you first sign up to Klarna, or you first sign up to Afterpay, or you first sign up to, a Barclays card or your credit card. There's always that first hurdle. But once you've signed up to it, that's then often the easiest way to pay. And people have already got those credit cards would be fine, and they'll use both interchange depending on where the best offers are. So it's less competition. I think what we've seen what I've seen in the research is that it's actually those people coming through, those youngest age groups, who actually, once they've signed up to a scheme, the question is then whether, if I'm a sort of 19, 20-year-old and I've signed up to Klarna and I'm using that well, and I'm using that to delay my payments, actually, where's the benefit of me then signing up to a credit card and going through that process?
That's interesting, because you made me think about, we use this term in the US, and I'm sure you do in the UK, about sort of being the default card, right? The default card, it's the default way to pay, right? It's broadening that whole idea of what the default is in wallets, in apps, online, etc.
And I think we did mention, I mentioned rewards a minute ago, if you have those linked to it, but you can also look at, I think, from kind of Tom's model he's describing, is if you can get a rewards debit card, or get invested into one of the kind of online banking ecosystems where you can earn rewards. And then when you need a little bit of a credit facility, you turn to one of these other third-party financing options.
And interesting, actually, I saw just earlier that again, Klarna has just launched Vibe, I think, in the US, which is its own kind of system where you get points and loyalty points. So the more you spend, the more points and rewards you get. So it is, again, building up that kind of product there, which is going to be far more kind of competitive, I think. The other point I wanted to make was about retailers. So I think certainly here in the UK, it's been really driven by a lot of retailers, because we know that the difficulties of the retail sector in recent years, particularly the fashion sector, has really struggled to kind of drive sales up. And I think it's been seen as a real opportunity to drive additional sales here. And it's quite a distinguishing factor for some of those. And so in the kind of first part of this, and probably still in this process where they're kind of winners of this, they're driving sales, getting spending, encouraging people to bring forward that spending. The question is whether that will be maintained, because we're now getting to the point where, pretty much all of the kind of fashion retailers, particularly young fashion retailers, now offer this product in one of the various players now offer this. And therefore, is there any distinguishing benefit for them anymore, or are they just paying this commission for their customers to borrow money effectively? And that's, further eating into their profit margins, and that's going to prove a difficult one in the future. So that's one that starts off being a winner, but long term, we have to see how that one pans out.
What do you think? What about Amazon in the mix here? How do you think this impacts Amazon, Tom?
Amazon at the moment don't do it. Interestingly, Amazon here on Prime, I assume it's probably the same in the US, but now give you the option to split payments effectively through Amazon Pay. So it's something which, again, in terms of innovation, you see that once that kind of customer expectation's been laid down, you see a lot of other players adopting that model. And it's becoming much more the kind of default option, or not the default option for customers, but it's becoming kind of table stakes for retailers that you have to kind of offer this. And so Amazon's now offering that as well to keep itself up to speed with all the rest.
And do you think Amazon would see this as a threat? I mean, I'm assuming that it would, right? Like, if you want to shop at it, it's taking retailers to a different platform, if you're shopping in the Klarna app, then you're not shopping on Amazon. So
yeah, I think it's slightly different in the fact that I think that the Klarna app is kind of a portal for other retailers. I'm not sure if it's largely a direct competitor to Amazon, largely because it's all been historically based in, up until now, it's largely around fashion. And I mean, Amazon, although it has its fashion pages, isn't its main, I think the customers it's targeting, those kind of millennial fashion focused millennials aren't really going to shop for fashion on Amazon very much. At the moment, I don't see there's a huge kind of overlap there. So maybe there will be in the future.
One of the areas where you might see some competition to Amazon, at least in the US, is with Shopify now. Shopify just recently announced that they're going to be rolling out installment financing options with the retailers through their portal. So that is, and I think Shopify has also announced a partnership with Facebook Marketplace as they try to expand into more e-commerce. So from that perspective, Amazon could be threatened by the growth of this buy now, pay later space.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? So let's go on and talk about the consumer. We're Mintel. We know what consumers want and why. What do you think? Is this good for the consumer?
I think that is a very tough question to answer, in all honesty. I think, first of all, in theory, I think, it makes things easy to shop. It makes it easy to shop online. It is very easy to use, largely, once you've set it up. It helps customers manage their cash flow, allows them to spread payments, increases customer choice, and all of those things, obviously, on the face of it, good for consumers. And obviously the fact they don't have to pay interest is also a benefit. And that's driving innovation in other areas in terms of, as Mark mentioned, in terms of credit cards and other players having to match this kind of flexibility around credit products. And that's great for consumers. Mm-hmm. However, I think there's always a difficulty in saying it's good for consumers when you're talking about making credit more freely and easily available. It largely assumes strong money management skills, and if you have strong management skills and discipline, then you don't spend more than you can afford, then absolutely it's a great option. But the problem is, we see from our research that young people do struggle to kind of balance short and long-term financial implications, and especially when the marketing for a lot of these brands is so heavily based on kind of fear of missing out, shop now, get it while you can, kind of.
Yeah, I was seeing some marketing. I think it was Sezzle. Apologies, Sezzle, if I get it wrong, if I got that wrong. But I think it was Sezzle, and it was basically flex now, pay later. And I was thinking, I'm not sure if I want my two teenagers to get that. Yeah, let's flex now and then pay later. I'm not sure that's the prudent message of fiscal responsibility that I want my teenagers to adopt. But go and carry on.
Yeah, and that's the thing in terms of the lesson, and it's the demographics this is targeting. It means that it's come up against quite a lot of backlash here in the UK, and I think incidentally, one of the points of difference I didn't mention earlier in the UK with this kind of product is that it's effectively, and be careful how I put this, but it's effectively not regulated because it falls outside of the regulation of the Financial Conduct Authority here. Now, interestingly, over the past year or so, buy now, pay later has become a real focus of the Financial Conduct Authority, and they've really clamped down on the traditional buy now, pay later schemes. But because these don't charge interest, they fall outside of its remit. And so there's very little, they have much less regulation around what they can and can't say, how they pitch it, how they explain it in a way that other credit products can't do. And there's been a lot of kind of backlash and discussion around that here. So I think it's hard to say it's necessarily good for the consumer. There are certainly lots of good things about it for consumers, but there's definitely a risk to consumers, as there is with any kind of new credit product, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, giving consumers more payment options is a good thing, especially when the terms are transparent and easy to understand. And that transparency is a key element to the success of buy now, pay later. I think if we go back to the question of, is this new, or go back to the question of, what are the competitive threats here? If you kind of place this model alongside a, deferred interest financing, where, you can make a purchase and pay no interest for, 12 months, but then on that 13th month, if you still have a balance, you're going back and retroactively paying a high amount of interest on everything. This does stand as a much better option for consumers. But we still need to be very careful because buying now and paying later is a form of debt accrual, and personal debt levels are at an all-time high in the U.S. So anytime we add to that amount, it should be of a concern. I think it is a good point that these do tend to be smaller dollar amounts, but still, if you're stacking that one on top of the other, and as Tom mentioned, younger consumers in particular sometimes struggle a little bit more with money management. They could end up being buried relatively deeply. And even though you're not paying, high interest rates, or sometimes you're not paying any interest, or your fees are pretty moderate, it's debt is still debt. Another thing I want to point out here from the consumer perspective is about, building credit. And these do not tend to be credit building products. So when we're thinking about young consumers and as they're trying to establish credit to get more attractive financial products in the future, they can get a credit card, they can get a secured credit card as they make payments. It's going to improve their credit profile. Most of these options, at least in the US, are not performing a hard credit check at the point of application, which can be a good thing. But at the same time, they are reporting missed payments to the bureaus. So again, these options aren't going to help you establish credit, but they do have the potential to harm your score.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point about credit. And I just bring in a sort of marketing angle, so sort of builds off what you're both saying. And we've seen so much innovation. Of course, we're seeing the response to buy now, pay later is new and different types of financing products. But of course, that means there's a whole slew of different types of financing options available for consumers, which, yes, it's a good thing, but on the other hand, it can also be confusing. So whether it's a balance transfer or a personal loan, or it's a credit card, a secured card, or whatever type of financing option that's out there, these are, need explaining, and consumers need to understand which is going back to your point, Tom, about planning, and they need to understand which is the best product for them. And so it becomes a marketing challenge, which I guess ties into what you were saying, Mark, about transparency. Excellent. All right. Well, that was the consumer. I did want to ask you both, so we're going through this tremendous sort of economic upheaval, recessions around the world. It's particularly where these BNPL products are taking off, like the US, UK, Canada, Australia. And, a lot of the sort of narrative around buy now, pay later is that it's the right product for the right time. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it certainly aligns with the increase in online shopping that we've been seeing as a result of COVID-19. And again, as we've kind of repeated, could be a cheaper and more accessible financing option, especially for those making smaller purchases. We have seen, especially from the credit card side, American Express, for example, kind of promoting, their Planet option as a tool for more essential type purchases or recurring purchases. So, adapting the marketing, adapting the product to fit the current state. I think more generally, though, there is some concern with the operating models, the profitability, and overall balance sheets of some of these providers. Is still a relatively new space. I'm referring now, of course, to the third-party buy now, pay later options, and it hasn't been fully tested in an economic downturn. So we talked about, rising debt levels, people, needing to find some new source of credit. The credit worthiness tests aren't as stringent. If you're not doing a hard credit check,
Sure.
More people are getting access to this credit. So just like any type of unsecured debt product, there's a risk that these sort of payments are not going to be prioritized in the same way as things like food, rent, and utilities. So there is some risk with the overall operating models if they'll be able to survive as the economy continues to trend in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. I think we're seeing it boom at the moment because, as we mentioned, it's been, these products are built around e-commerce, and now we've seen this huge growth in e-commerce because of lockdowns and everything else. And so inevitably they're doing quite well in that respect. And I think also certainly here early on, there was a lot of talk of kind of a V-shaped recovery where it was going to all go down and then go straight back to how it was afterwards. And for even people who are good with money management, that made a lot of sense to say, all right, I'm in this country furloughed, so my pays a bit, but perhaps I'll get this and I can pay it in 90 days when everyone's telling me the world have gone back to normal again. And I mean, now it's looking less and less likely that we're going to go straight back to normal again and have a much slower kind of recovery and have more of a downturn. And certainly towards the end of this year in the UK, we have the furlough system where a lot of people are on 80% pay and being paid by the government rather than working. And that's overwhelmingly also younger people are most likely to be affected by that. And so what happens when we get to the end of that, and if we see an uplift in kind of unemployment amongst that kind of the core age range, that's going to be, like Mark says, a real test of these products to see how they...
That's coming in October, right? October?
It's going to end in October, unless they extend it. So they're not going to. So it's due to end in October. And it'd be really interesting to see how that pans out. The one thing I would just add to that, which is interesting, which is, again, slightly different, is that a lot of these companies stress that because they're smaller value loans, effectively, they sort of say they see it as they can kind of write off, have more resilience in that fact, and sort of if they were sort of traditional buy now pay later would have sort of larger loans which would go south, whereas these are kind of lots of smaller loans, so they can kind of bear that out a little bit better. But like I say, it's been untested, so we shall see.
Yeah, and I'd just add that, yes, untested, and obviously the fate of these companies is heavily tied to their retail partners and how they're performing. But I think it's a resounding yes in terms of the right product, right time. Also because, a lot of the banks have gone quiet in terms of marketing, trying to figure out what next, what to do in terms of acquisition and that sort of thing. And so there's an opportunity to fill the gap. And these companies, that's all they do, right? That's all they do. So they're going to have to fight to survive and fight to get their message out there. So there's an opportunity for them to fill that void.
I think a lot of them are still based, that still have a lot of investor funding. So, I mean, unlike, if you look at someone like Klarna, it still attracts huge amounts of investment for the long term, and it's got big investors like H&M and Snoop Dogg, I think, is an investor, all these strange people who throw money into it because they can see the long-term potential. So I think what you'll find is if any of them do struggle to get through the period, it's going to be probably the smaller, more niche ones, and it might consolidate the market a bit. I wouldn't have thought you'll see the model disappear by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and I think that fits, Andrew, as we've discussed in other forums, kind of, a big prediction for what's going to happen is consolidation in the industry, especially amongst fintechs. There's so many players out there, and in this type of economic situation, it's hard to imagine, so many of them surviving. So I think there will be some consolidation. I think, like Tom said, some of the biggest names that we've discussed are probably going to have the longevity, but some of these other kind of more niche players, more newcomers might struggle coming into the situation potentially at the wrong time.
Great points. All right, so I think we come to the end of our time. But I want to ask one sort of final question, is just to get your prediction on a buy now pay later brand to watch and why. For our listeners, these are not stock picks, but just who do you think who do you think we should be paying attention to in the coming months? What are your thoughts?
Well, mine's definitely not a stock pick. So I'm going to go a little bit outside the box here and say Goldman Sachs. So 10 years ago, it might have sounded crazy to say, hey, look to Goldman Sachs for retail banking disruption. But they've made a lot of large strides in a very short period of time. So in addition to the Apple Card, which of course Goldman Sachs is the issuer behind the Apple Card, that now lets customers pay off their iPhone as well as most Apple hardware and accessories over time with no interest. Goldman Sachs also recently partnered with JetBlue Vacations to let customers create installment plans for leisure travel. So this is called Marcus Pay, following on the branding of Marcus for their personal loans and online savings accounts. So Marcus Pay now is another buy now pay later option, currently just in partnership with JetBlue Vacations, but I think we'd certainly expect to see more types of partnerships added as Goldman kind of continues this surprising expansion into the consumer banking space.
Interesting. Goldman, one to watch. Tom?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I think here in the UK, it's hard to argue with the sort of dominance of Klarna. They continue to innovate and continue to grow, and they really dominate the space. And I think we'll see it, as we've already mentioned, become more embedded in more established brands like Amazon, more people offering this kind of option. It'll become more mainstream. But I wanted to just pick up on a much smaller, not necessarily going to dominate this market, but an interesting development was a company here called Curve, is offering over-the-top banking product, and they've just been trialing a Curve credit product, which actually allows you to to split payments over 3 months in a similar way as Klarna, but it allows you to do that retrospectively, which I thought was an interesting thing. You can actually decide up to, it was 14 days, but I read something the other day they've extended it to 90 days, that you can retrospectively decide to put in credit. So say you put something on your debit card, you bought something and you decided actually you changed your mind and realized you didn't have enough money, you can go back and change your payment method and then split it out over into sort of multiple installments, 3 or 4 installments, however many they're going to settle on the end. It's still under.
So it gives you even more flexibility effectively.
So it's just pushing forward on this, like we said about innovation, it's just pushing forward this kind of flexibility, giving consumers absolute choice over what they do, when they pay and how they pay. And I think that's really the big shift here that we're seeing from a retail perspective. It's this separating the payment, the kind of pain of that payment from the actual purchase point, if that makes any sense. It's you can then decide when you pay for it and where and how.
Yeah.
And I think Curve also is entering the US market. So currently, I think just in the UK, but following other kind of UK challenger banks like Monzo and Revolut are making their own presence in the US market. So we'll be watching out to see when that happens and what the results are.
The Curve product is a perfect example of how it can work in partnership with the existing payment models, because it isn't a payment system in itself. It's you always attach a card behind the Curve. It's an over-the-top bank. It's not a bank account. You always put a card behind it, so you can still earn your air miles. You can still earn whatever your cash back on your credit card. But then it gives you this option over the top because it will just charge it to your credit card. So it's an interesting one to look at.
Innovative. And I think they got caught up in that Wirecard thing, but they seem to have been responding.
They did. It got entirely shut down. But it's working again now. My Curve card's opening again now.
Well, yeah, I would love to hear more about that. I'd add a couple. I like the look of Sezzle, just newer player, adding, obviously I've seen that they've been getting more funding recently. They've just entered into Canada. They actually were raising money on the Australian stock exchange, but obviously a US player. So they look like an interesting one to watch, just a newer player into the market. I was also going to add one more, which is PayBright in Canada. And the reason I thought that was an interesting one, because they've been around for quite some time, but they've partnered with Klarna, who I know who you were talking about, Tom. So they partnered with Klarna to sort of expand their reach. So it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about collaboration in order to, sort of build presence. And they're also building up new, retail partnerships. They just established a relationship with Group Dynamite, which is a fashion retailer in Canada. So it's interesting to see the ones that are making moves, innovating, looking for new partnerships, especially, in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. So, obviously, as with everything at the moment, things are changing at a rapid pace. We're going to be staying on top of this trend at Mintel. I want to thank my guests, Tom Slide and Dr. Mark Miller. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to rate and review us. We will catch you on the next episode of Little Conversation. If you want to know more about Mintel, who we are and what we do, head over to mintel.com and follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and check out our blog for even more insights from our analysts. Thank you.